Sunday Surefire Podcast. I'm your host, the Commish. Joining me today is the co-host, Aaron Downtown Brown.
Hey, hey.
And Ethan Weaver.
Commish, how we doing?
Hanging in there, fellas. Doing pretty well. Training camp is now well underway for every team in the league. So a lot of fun stuff to catch up on there. For us here, we're continuing our trip around all the divisions. We're going to be starting out with the AFC North here. So a lot to cover there. Just gonna rattle off a couple of quick news items here right off the top. We're gonna start with Tim Patrick, who, quite frankly, really just can't catch a break on the injury front. Suffered a torn Achilles in training camp and will miss the entire 2023 campaign. Of course, this comes on the heels of a training camp injury last season, a torn ACL that forced him to miss the entirety of the 2022 season. Overall, just a really tough blow for a receiver entering his age 30 season. You never really know what the long-term future is going to hold for him. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that he can get back on a football field someday. But back-to-back major injuries for a guy getting up there in age already. So tough news there. And speaking of the Broncos receiver room, KJ Hamler is also going to miss some time with a heart condition. The team is optimistic that they can re-sign him at some point down the road, next few weeks, maybe in the coming months, who knows. But a scary situation nonetheless. We'll hope that he can resume his playing career sooner rather than later. So it's just a tough week really for the Broncos receivers. Maybe it opens the door for more Suttons to filter to Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, or maybe even the rookie Marvin Mims is the biggest benefactor of this injury news. So we'll keep you guys posted with any training camp reports out of Denver and everywhere else around the league. And then one last situation to touch on here is the more of the running back conversation. We won't rehash that entire conversation that we've had over recent weeks, but Jonathan Taylor is the newest player to voice some frustration with his situation. He's actually requested a trade after some back and forth with Colts management, including owner Jim Irsay. If there was ever a player in today's game that should be getting paid as the running back position, it should be Jonathan Taylor, who's been productive in his couple years in the NFL. Just 24 years old and only 860 career touches on his frame. He's definitely a guy that should be valuable to NFL teams. Definitely another situation to monitor going forward because Taylor is the type of player who's in the prime of his career, and him moving teams could really shift kind of the landscape of fantasy football, at least for 2023. And so if he changes teams, we'll definitely be right on that news, letting you know where he's going and the fantasy fallout of such a move if it were to take place. But for now, we're just going to kind of be in a holding pattern on JT, and we'll keep more breaking news coming as it comes along to us. But we have a lot to cover in AFC North, so we'll start there. We're starting with studs here. We'll then transition to busts, guys that we don't necessarily like at their ADP, sleepers, guys that we think are undervalued at their current draft position, and then some dynasty stashes, guys that are good for maybe parking on a taxi squad or in a bench spot somewhere deep in a dynasty roster to hang on to for the future. For the studs, busted sleepers, we're going to be using Fantasy Pros, half point average draft position or ADP to kind of just let you know where these guys are going in early August drafts and just kind of let you know what the price points are on them. So you give us a little more context as to where they fit into the stud, sleeper, or bust categories. But we'll start with the high profile studs here. I'll throw it out to you fellas here. Who wants to lead us off here? Who wants to talk about their stud in the AFC North?
I'll kick it off here. I'll start with my stud and I'll make it short and sweet. I'm gonna go with Nick Chubb. A reliable running back that I think he's got another great year ahead of him. Right? It was just a year ago when I think he was competing with King Henry. Kind of who is that best running back in the league. But I think as a pure runner, I think Nick Chubb proved that last year. But guess what? In 2023, he comes back with a better QB situation, still has a great line. I think that just lines up for more scoring opportunities. So that's great. He's going to get the yards every year. He gets his attempts. He now does not have Kareem Hunt to compete with anymore. So I think if he can actually have a career high in rushing touchdowns, I think he's going to have a great season. So my stud in the AFC North is Nick Chubb.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, especially with the running back landscape as it is. These younger backs that are looking for contracts, they're obviously a risk to miss time or hold out or whatever it is. A guy like Nick Chubb is steady in his spot, has the contract, and is just going to go out there and play ball this year with no worries to fantasy managers. So a nice call there. My stud is Lamar Jackson. who has an ADP of 36 overall, QB5. So his ADP is the end of round 3. And simply when he's playing and healthy, his ceiling is quarterback 1 every single week. He has 3 first-round wide receivers at his disposal now with OBJ, Rashad Bateman, and Zay Flowers, along with one of the league's premier tight ends in Mark Andrews. They had the 7th most rushing attempts last year and the 28th, and they were 28th in pass attempts. These numbers are a little skewed as Jackson only played 12 games, but just looking at those numbers, I would assume with Todd Monken, the pass attempts are going to go up. Todd Monken helped lead Georgia to 2 straight national titles, averaging 40.7 points per game. And Monken likes to play fast paced. He likes to create space. And the more space that's created in his scheme, the more rushing lanes for Lamar Jackson. I think it's also going to open up himself to a career year throwing the football. So I like how Monken's going to bring this offense to 2023. Last year at Georgia, Stetson Bennett even had 10 rushing touchdowns last season. So one can only imagine what Lamar Jackson can do in this offense. So I'm very excited with Todd Monken leading the way on the offensive side to see what Lamar Jackson can do in this new and improved Ravens offense.
2 strong calls to start the show there, fellas. Chubb's a beast. He's right on the borderline of the 1st and 2nd round at the moment ADP as well. So like you can even get this guy as your 2nd player on your team, which would be just a rock solid start to your draft season this year. Lamar Jackson, I mean, Ethan hit the nail on the head. Guy's an absolute massive ceiling every time he steps on the football field. I'm invested in a big Lamar campaign this year. I know you guys are too in the various leagues that we're in. So I love that call as well. My stud here, and this one might be kind of obvious with those first 2 guys coming off the board, is going to be Jamar Chase. ADP is 3 and good for WR2 overall. And I don't need to go on a long rant about Chase, so I won't. But the quick points here: he's been top 6 in points per game in each of the last 2 seasons. Those are his only 2 years in the league thus far. He was WR4 overall as a rookie, WR12 last season, despite missing 7 weeks. Entering year 3, you can just kind of feel that his best days are in front of him as he steps into his prime. He plays in a high-scoring offense with the star quarterback in Joe Burrow. And if you're drafting in the top 5 in a 1 QB league, you can select the guy with confidence and build your team around him this season. So those are our studs in the AFC North. Not really any groundbreaking information there. So we're going to go right into the bust category. And I'll get us started with this one here. My bust here, I said some nice things about Jamar Chase and the Cincinnati offense, and I meant it wholeheartedly, but my bust is actually going to be Joe Burrow. ADP of 34, that's the late 3rd round, and QB4 overall. This is really hard for me to say because I love Joe Burrow as an NFL quarterback, and I actually think he's ranked properly in almost every format. If you're talking superflex leagues in redraft, superflex dynasty leagues, he's an very early pick in those drafts. I think that's perfect spot for him. Best ball, I think he's awesome because he is going to have spike weeks. The only place I think he's a little too expensive is in 1 QB redraft leagues with 4 points per passing touchdowns, which is what we're talking about here. So that's why I'm bringing him up as a bust. Just really the cost has a big part to do with it. But I do think he's going to have a good season. Could be a mid-range QB1 again. But this one's all about the price point. Like I said, it's late 3rd round here. In this range, there's just a number of running backs and wide receivers that I'd rather put on my roster and just kind of continue to build and fill up my team as I go. And if you're willing to wait just 1 more round, you can get in on quarterbacks like Justin Herbert or Justin Fields. Both of those guys are likely going to have a higher rushing floor for you this season. And both those guys have Fields has got a really improved array of weapons, and Herbert just added another weapon himself in Quentin Johnson in the draft, along with a good offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore. So I think I'd rather be a little bit more patient and grab one of those guys while I add another receiver or a running back to help my team right now. And I don't want to be prisoner of the moment on Joe Burrow's cap strain, as it doesn't look like he's going to miss any regular season time. But he did run for 257 yards and 5 scores on the ground last year, giving us a little bit more production on the ground than you'd think for a guy who can stand in the pocket and win. So if his mobility is compromised, all that production is going to come from the pocket, which is very much in the realm of possibilities for him. He does have the talent and the weapons around him to overcome mobility concerns. But the guy, he has to throw for a ton of yards. We're talking like 4,500 or so yards, maybe 40 plus touchdowns for him to return value as a top 3 or 4 QB coming off the board. So as much as I like the player, as much as I like where he's ranked in various formats, he's just a little bit too expensive for me at the early part or the late part of round 3. So those are my thoughts on Burrow, Aaron. Where do you think about that? And why don't you go ahead and give me your bust in the North as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a Chiefs fan, I kind of like that. But talking fantasy here, I think we've had a couple shows with startup drafts and whatnot. I think from the drafting perspective, I think you're spot on. I think there's a couple quarterbacks that I would be just as happy to have, especially this year with Herbert and some other guys. I'll get into that a little later too, but um, couldn't agree with you more from a startup perspective. If you have Burrow, I would say like don't be in a panic and try to trade him. I still think he'll still put up numbers this year. Probably throw over the 4,500 yards as you said, but if you're drafting, definitely take the commission's advice there. But for my bust, I'm actually going to the Ravens offense. I'm going with OBJ. Odell Beckham signing that huge contract coming off a year where he actually didn't play. So I did not play, signed that, massive 1 year deal, already talking about this may be his last year. I mean, this isn't a money deal. I don't know what is. He's got to learn a new offense, new quarterback, new walking in a new organization, right? After you just simply did not play. Yes, we know his past, that he can put out, some highlight plays here and there. But I think OBJ, considering some guys actually as teammates, you can get below him with Bateman and Zay Flowers and rounds below him, make OBJ a bust category here. I think also, a big thing is that he may be lining up against the CB1s on the against the defense, right? And it's something that, I do know he's bulked up a little bit, but that's not really his game. His game has always been, the quick twitches and just nice route running and using that speed. You never know, not playing for that season and tearing his ACL. With players with using those strengths to their abilities, I'm not so keen on that this year, right? So I actually think it may open up opportunities for his counterparts, and not to mention Mark Andrews just came off a 4 year with Lamar Jackson in 2021 at 154 targets, so massive targets that get looked at with Mark Andrews as well as being that number one target there. So I say stay away from OBJ. He's my bust in the AFC North.
Ethan, are you punting on an Odell resurgence as well?
I don't think I'm punting on it based on his ADP. I mean, he's wide receiver 48, 116 overall, so that's the 10th round, I believe, which isn't bad to take a dart throw. I think I would much rather have Zay Flowers or Bateman just because I like the upside of the younger receivers, especially. I mean, Zay Flowers is getting a lot of hype in camp, but they're pretty close together in ADP. As I said, OBJ's 116, Bateman's 122, and Zay Flowers is 124. Out of all three, I'd probably take the cheapest one in Zay Flowers, just because he's the unknown. He's been getting some hype, and Rashad Bateman just can't prove to us that he can stay healthy. And OBJ, who knows how he's going to be coming off his injuries, his missed season. He's older. As Aaron alluded to, it's a new offense. So I don't hate OBJ at his ADP, but I'm definitely not one of these guys sitting here thinking that he's gonna blow up this year. So I'm probably not gonna have a lot of OBJ at all this year.
I'll have no shares of OBJ at this price point. Just looking down the list of the guys going behind him at his position, guys like Cortland Sutton, Elijah Mitchell, a little bit further down the board here. You can even get, if you want to tuck yourself into Jameson Williams, you can, or even Elijah Moore, who I'm pretty high on too. So at least a few of those guys I'd rather take shots on in this range of the draft where I'm just shooting for upside. Odell, the long-term pass is great. The short-term pass, even his last 3 or 4 years or so, he hasn't really fully given you a full season worth of greatness that he showed early on in his career. So at this stage of the game, I'm not chasing those distant memories at this point. I'd rather pivot to other guys I think who are going to be bigger pieces of their offense and pieces that I can bank on to at least give me a chance to outperform this ADP. So if you want to take a shot on Odell, go for it. But personally, I'm not overly optimistic. But Ethan, give me a guy who you're not overly optimistic on for 2023.
I'm lower on George Pickens in 2023. He's coming in at overall 87 in ADP, wide receiver 36. which is overall it's the 8th round, and a back end wide receiver 3. And I just don't see I just don't I feel like at this ADP at wide receiver 36, you're kind of drafting him towards his ceiling. I get he does have upside. I understand that, and people are projecting him to take a step. I'm just not a big Pickens guy. Once Claypool got traded last year, weeks 9 through 18, he never eclipsed more than 6 targets. He only had a 15.6% target share on the entire season last year. They brought in Allen Robinson. Calvin Austin is returning from injury. I think they're going to have a pretty good running game with Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. And obviously, you have a top 10 tight end in Pat Freiermuth. So I just think with an offense led by Kenny Pickett, is Kenny Pickett going to be able to produce a top 10 tight end? What I think is going to be a top 15 wide receiver in Deontay Johnson, and then have a guy like Allen Robinson and George Pickens kind of competing for that number 2 spot? Are the targets going to be kind of evenly distributed with those guys? I'm just not sure how it's going to work out. So I think a back end wide receiver 3 is going to be Pickens ceiling this year. Last year, I mean, he had 8 weeks outside the top 50. He did have 9 in the top 24, which isn't too bad. But I mean, like half the year he was just unstartable. So I just think the way Pickens' game is, he's going to be used more. He was kind of used as their deep threat last year. He was 7th in deep targets, and he was 19th in air yards, and had the 3rd highest ADOT in the league last year. Which sounds great, but as I mentioned, this kind of indicates that Pickens is going to be used potentially as the field stretcher, big play wide receiver, and I think that's how he's going to have to make his fantasy points, because he barely had separation last year, only 1.35 yards of separation, which is not 94th amongst wide receivers. So he's a guy that needs to go up and get it, get those jump balls to have consistent fantasy weeks. And I'm just not sure if Kenny Pickett's going to be able to come through for him, even though I do think Kenny Pickett is going to take a step up. I just think Pickens, I'd rather go in a different direction. I think at that ADP, I mean, players in that area, you have Gibson, you have Treylon Burks, you have Jordan Addison, even Jahan Dotson, who's the clear number 2 on his team, and Treylon Burks is right in that area. So for me, I think I'm gonna pass if Pickens is on the clock in round 8.
I'm going to pass on him as well. And it's a good point that you make about Kenny Pickett. If you're high on Deontay bounce back, if you have Pat Freiermuth, whatever, tight end 7 to 10 range, and you're also going to bake in Pickens taking a leap up to WR2 status. I mean, I feel like it's a lot to ask of for a team that wants to pound the ball a lot. So I agree on those points as well. If Pickens is going to massively outperform this, I mean, sure, maybe he finishes as like a mid-range WR3 and outperforms it a little bit, but to really move the needle, I just think this guy's going to have a massive TD spike, and that's not something I'm willing to bet on either, because if I look at him get red zone targets last year, he only had 6 of them on the whole season, and we're not talking about a guy who missed a big chunk of the year with an injury. He actually played all 17 weeks and only saw 6 targets into the end zone. So maybe Pittsburgh throws a little bit more. I just don't love Pickens here at his cost. So I like this. I agree with you. I like this call it a lot. Aaron, talk to me about Pickens. I know he wasn't a guy we were super high about coming out of last year's draft in our conversations. Do you kind of feel the same way, or has your tune changed on him somewhat heading into 2023?
No, I think you guys are on it there with it really depends how well Pickett plays. Yes, I do think that Pickett had, some nice momentum towards the end of the year. Something that, just is constantly in my mind with fantasy in this division and the AFC North is come playoff time, the weather's crap, right? So it's like year after year, you always see those games where, they punt a million times a game and there's no passing game, right? So if you got to waste like maybe your 9th round pick on Pickens, yes, he may have some nice weeks for you throughout the year, but maybe come playoff time, you're probably not going to start him when that weather is below 0 and 20-mile-per-hour winds. That's something to think about too. So that's what I would say on Pickens here.
Got it. Talk to me about someone who thinks of flying a little bit under the radar at this time of year here. Who's your sleeper in the AFC North?
Ooh, sleeper. So this is the convo I like here. I'm gonna go with a guy we brought up a couple times this time of the year last year. Um, but more of a stash candidate. This year, I'm going with Jerome Ford as a sleeper.
Yes.
I know
Yes.
yes, commish. Got it. So he was also one of my boys coming from that Cincinnati team that made it to the playoffs in college football. So Ford was a talented running back, on a team that had quite a bit of depth at the running back position with the Browns, right? So I mentioned I like Chubb as a stud. But there are going to be a lot of vacated targets with Kareem Hunt leaving. The Kareem Hunt in that offense had 40 to 50 targets per year, right? So which is pretty nice for a running back as a running back that you split reps with, right? So Jerome Ford had a lot of I guess time last year where they wanted to get him out on the field as a kick returner, and then what that told me last year is like they kind of were setting himself up for 2023 for this role. So I do think they're trying to make him that RB2 on the team. But I also think he'll get a lot of chances. He'll relieve Nick Chubb. He'll also reports in camp is saying that he's running routes really well, right? So he may get some of those targets from Kareem Hunt. So this is where maybe he moves from that stash candidate to actually scoring points. We're going to be talking best ball in a couple weeks too. He may have some nice, decent best ball weeks, and then of course if there's an unfortunate injury to Chubb, I think Ford can take the reins pretty well over there in Cleveland. So Jerome Ford is my sleeper candidate here.
The reason I was so excited when Aaron said Jerome Ford's name is that this was almost like a full 365 call out for me. Where last year when we were talking about NFC North, I was telling you that he was my NFC North stash candidate, someone you could park on your bench or your taxi squad and just be patient with. And now you fast forward 1 year and he's the second guy in line here behind Nick Chubb. I mean, the rest of this depth chart consists of guys like John Kelly and Demetric Felton, so guys that aren't certainly aren't high profile names. So we know this offense likes to utilize multiple backs. Even in a complementary role, Ford should have some standalone value. And like Aaron said, even if disaster strikes and Nick Chubb goes down, then Ford's going to walk into a workload in what's been a favorable run offense to running backs. So I'm optimistic on Ford. I remain optimistic on Ford, especially given what's not in front of him at the depth chart outside of Nick Chubb. So Ethan, give me your thoughts on Ford, and then give me someone that you think's undervalued right now.
I think Ford's a great call. Just looking at that depth chart, like you said, there's really nobody else to really compete with him for the RB2 role. And that role has been pretty fruitful in years past. Hunt really couldn't get it done last year. And Jerome Ford had a nice little career at Cincinnati. And the fact that they didn't bring anybody of note in indicates to me that the Cleveland Browns are confident in Jerome Ford's ability and his role as the clear cut back behind Nick Chubb. So I like that call. I'm going to stay with the running back position. My sleeper is Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Overall 143 ADP. That's RB 50. And I really liked what I saw from Jalen Warren last year. I thought he looked at times like the more explosive back than Najee Harris. I mean, at 5'8", 207 pounds, 31.5 BMI, which is the 80th percentile. He can carry the workload if Harris does get hurt. And Warren was a very efficient runner last year. Yards created per touch, which is all yards above and beyond what was blocked per carry and reception and generated by the runner after first evaded tackle, was 3.82 yards, which was number five overall. Najee Harris was 2.13 yards, which was number 45. So a big difference there. True yards per carry, discounts runs greater than 10 yards. Warren was at 4.7, which was number 12 among running backs. Najee Harris, 3.7 yards, which is number 59. Yards per touch, Jalen Warren, 5.6, 11th overall. Harris, 4.0, 52 overall. Then the breakaway run rate, percentage of carries of 15 yards or more. He had a 6.5%, which was number 16 overall, to Harris's 2.6%, which was number 51 overall. So obviously the numbers are skew heavily to Warren. I understand obviously the efficiency is going to go down, as Harris was a complete workhorse last year with 65.1% of the snap share to Warren's 31.6. So I understand Warren should be more efficient, but those numbers are pretty dramatic, and I think it does prove that Warren does belong in the NFL and was very efficient when given the opportunity. And as I said, I thought he looked very good when he touched the ball. I think I think he can force the Steelers into like more like a 55% snap share next year with him and Harris. I mean, Warren really started to take off at the tail end of the year. I mean, the Steelers started off 2-6, and they finished the season on a 7-2 run, and Warren was a big reason for that. So I think if Warren can build upon that and go into this year and kind of force the Steelers to get him on the field more, I think Warren could be a pretty sneaky play, especially if he's the clear cut third down back, which he essentially relegated Najee Harris to first and second down last year towards the back end of the season. So I think Warren can get his 10 to 12 carries or whatever, and then still have the third down role. So, and if that's the case, I think he can pay dividends at his ADP.
I like the Warren call out. He's a player that earned more work and has earned more work in the future based on the limited sample that he showed as a rookie. Najee Harris is a guy they've just absolutely run into the ground to start his career in the first 2 seasons. And, maybe they're just content to do that and ride him out the way they did Le'Veon Bell. But I think it would actually preserve Najee a little bit, keep him a little bit fresher for those December games that Aaron was referencing in the NFC North, where it really turns into a bar fight out there. So you want to have your players, your better players rested and ready to go for those late season games when it actually matters. And I think Warren getting more work out there, whether it's on first or second down or those third down reps, whatever the case may be, they need to get him out there more. And he actually took on 281 touches in his final season in college at Oklahoma State. So he has shown us, at least at the college level, that he can remain somewhat efficient at just under 5 yards per carry, even with a bigger workload. So we'll see what comes for him this season, Pittsburgh. But he's a guy I'm holding on to some shares of, and I'm hoping that he pans out in a big way. My sleeper here, I'm going to go back to the Browns. I'm going to go to Elijah Moore. His ADP is 117, good for WR 47 at the moment. I just think this is an absolute bargain for Moore, who's being drafted in round 10 as a borderline WR 5 on your fantasy team, which is kind of nuts. He joins the Browns after an up and down couple seasons to start out with the Jets. I'm on record as being high on a Deshaun Watson bounce back, but I know even if others on here or others in the industry aren't as high on Watson coming back to what he used to be. I mean, you have to at least agree that what he is a massive upgrade over what he had with the Jets, catching balls from the likes of Zach Wilson and Joe Flacco and Mike White. And when I think of Moore, I still think back to that 5-game stretch he had as a rookie that was just 2 years ago, where he saw 45 targets for 28 catches, 392 yards and 5 touchdowns before an injury ended his season. And it was just electric. It looked like he was going to break out right there. It wasn't meant to be there with a mess of a situation in New York, but he gets a new start to his career here in Cleveland. Amari Cooper does figure to be this team's top target getter this season, but the number 2 job really is wide open. Cleveland did not trade 3 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson to continue to hand the ball off. If they wanted to just keep handing the ball to Chubb or Hunt or Jerome Ford now that he's going to be the number 2 guy there, they would have kept Baker Mayfield or went into a cheaper direction at quarterback. So this team is going to be more active in throwing the ball. That's what their actions have told us, between bringing in other guys in the draft and getting Elijah Moore here via trade in their biggest offseason move. So they were 25th in the league in pass rate last year. So I only see that amount coming up. So they got to see what they have in Watson. I think Moore is going to be a benefactor of that. And the absolute worst case here is that Moore gets hurt, or maybe he doesn't pan out, or whatever the case may be. But this is only the 10th round we're talking about. So it's not a massive hit rate in the 10th round. You want to swing for upside. This is a good swing for it. And if it doesn't work out, you have 3 or 4 other receivers on your team already in all likelihood that can pick up the slack. So Aaron, what are your thoughts on Elijah Moore as a sleeper this year?
I like Moore. I think that's a good call out. I think he's a good fit for the team. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones was he was the second option last year. Had some nice games and nice plays and whatnot, but just that's probably his true competition. But I think the league's shown us that you got to have three um, wide receivers that you're pretty comfortable with week in, week out. And I think Elijah Moore, he can do a lot of danger, right? I think lining up in the slot or maybe getting some deep shot, especially with having to pay a lot of attention to Cooper over there. I think he's going to have some nice weeks. So I do like the more call out. Switching gears to stash candidates. I'm kind of hoping this is another full circle here. Maybe I'll go with the same formula as the Jerome Ford call out of last year. All right, so I'm gonna say as my stash. I'm gonna say Chase Brown with the Bengals. Okay, another running back, another good little prospect coming out of Illinois. I think you wrote a couple blogs on him. We brought him up as a kind of just a guy to keep an eye on. And he landed as far as landing spots. I think with the Bengals, some people were crossing their fingers with what was going on with Mixon's legal case and this and that that Brown could potentially be that starter. But I think with Mixon kind of restructuring his contract and being that starter, I think this kind of puts him back in this stash candidate um, category here. But I do think Chase Brown has got he's really got writing on the wall, just a similar case of Jerome Ford where maybe even slightly better, where he doesn't have as many backs to compete with. I actually think he'll solidify himself as that RB2 role over with Cincinnati. And shoot, if he can return some kicks, like I said, that gets him on the field a little bit as well. So Chase Brown, and I think he's a great handcuff for Mixon on a team that is a playoff team, right? So I do like getting running backs on winning teams, right? You just are just increasing your chances usually for scoring and touchdown upside. So I'm going to say Chase Brown as my stash in this division.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call with Chase Brown. He's a very athletic back, and I think he can definitely compete for touches in Cincinnati. He had a 4.43 40 at the combine with a 40-inch vertical and a 10'7" broad jump. So as I said, he's just an athletic specimen. And I believe Travion Williamson just got carted off the field today. It was either yesterday or today. So that just opens the door for more touches for Chase Brown. So I know people are high on him. They love the landing spot in Cincinnati. And he didn't get, I mean, ideal draft capital, but hey, if he's running back on a 53, there's opportunity. And with the way Mixon wasn't, I guess, welcome back with open arms, I would say. I mean, everybody thought he was basically done in Cincinnati. He ends up coming back. I don't think, I think Mixon's best days are behind him. And I think Chase Brown is definitely going to have opportunity to carve himself a role in a very high-powered Cincinnati Bengals offense. So with that, I will go to my stash. I'm going to stay in Pittsburgh. I feel like all I have is Pittsburgh Steelers over here, but I'm going to say Calvin Austin, who's wide receiver 138, aka free. He's not really getting drafted in redraft leagues, but I just think he's a decent stash. I do think he's going to be able to get his opportunity this year to compete for targets in the slot. He's been talked up by his teammates in a very positive light, and he has a very, very good athletic profile. He missed his rookie year with a foot injury. He was having a pretty good 2022 camp until his season was ended with that injury. But I mean, we're talking 4.32 kind of speed, 39-inch vert, 11'3" broad, 407 shuttle, 6.65 3-cone. I mean, all that equals just freak athlete. And Pittsburgh, if they can do one thing, it's develop wide receivers. So I know Allen Robinson's there through 2024, but if Calvin Austin shows something this year and can work himself into a role, you never know. And that's what these stashes are for. They're dart throws. They're players that sit at the end of your bench, and you're just hoping. But I do like the Calvin Austin profile. He's a little small, but I love that athleticism, and I do like his situation.
Yeah, I like him as a player too. I'm holding on to him in a couple places. Allen Robinson will not be on this team past 2023. They can save over $10 million in cap space by moving on from him, and it's under $2 million in dead cap space to do so. So that I mean that guy's lucky he's in the league right now after what he's done the last couple of years. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if Calvin Austin is running ahead of him by the time this season comes to an end. And A-Rob's just a guy that we used to know. But I'm gonna stick with the Cleveland Browns for my stash in Dynasty. I'm gonna go to Cedric Tillman, big body target, 6'3", 215. Tillman was productive in the SEC at Tennessee a couple seasons ago. Had 64 receptions for just over 1,000 yards and 12 scores, catching passes from Hendon Hooker. Between Cooper, Elijah Moore, DPJ, David Bell, there are bodies in front of him right now. But if you fast forward just one season into the future, which is kind of what you have to do with a lot of these stash plays, Cooper's going to be 30 years old. Peoples-Jones is going to be a free agent. And, if Cooper's contract is one that they can get into out of easily enough if they want to. After the season, we'll see what they do on that. But I think he was drafted to be a Peoples-Jones replacement, another big-bodied receiver who can win with contested catches on the outside. If this offense comes together this season like I expected to, I think you're gonna want pieces of this unit. And sometimes in Dynasty, you need to get a share of players that you think are gonna fall into teams that are in that category a year before the hype starts. That's what the end of your bench is for in Dynasty. That's what your taxi squad spots are for. And I believe that Tillman fits the mold for that type of player who's very affordable. He goes in the third round of rookie drafts right now. So, we've seen cases in leagues too that we play in, guys, where he actually didn't even get drafted and he was getting picked up off the waivers with Fab. So there's a chance he might still be out there. If not, maybe he's someone you could kick the tires on or have him tossed into a bigger deal as kind of like a small little add-in player. So just get shares on the cheap now if you can. Stash him in hope, and if he doesn't work out, then move on to another guy in a year or two from now. So that's where I'm at on my guy Cedric Tillman. Aaron, what are your thoughts on him? And then who are you hanging on to in hopes that they break out in the future?
I guess I'll just comment on both here with Austin and Tillman. I think those are both examples of in the stash category. I think especially at the wide receiver, I think what you're hoping for is at least let them win out to be the wide receiver 4 on the team. To get they do get out there and get some reps and get some real playing time throughout the season and come up with a couple nice maybe touchdown grabs and maybe 2 to 3 scores would be great. That's what you're really looking for because that's enough for the team to kind of hold on to so that they don't draft high capital in in the future drafts, right? They can go in another position. So I think if those guys can beat out at least grab that 4th spot on the depth chart, and then if they're really the next man up, if an injury happens, then now you're cooking with some grease at that point, right? So I think both of those guys are both good call outs for that type of situation and stash candidates. But no, I'm actually pretty happy with my Chase Brown call out. I'm going to stick with my boy Chase, and hopefully he's carving out a big piece of that Cincinnati offense this year in 23.
Love it. This is a fun division to watch every year, just for us being fans of football before we were ever into fantasy. When you think football, you think hard hitting and tough cold weather games, and that's what this division brings every single year. So I feel like that race is always competitive too, most seasons down the stretch. So it's fun to watch those late season games where those teams are just leaving their all out there, and it's really good and good to watch from a football standpoint. And there's a lot of fantasy relevant guys that fit that mold too. So fun to run down that one. We're gonna finish up the northern part of the divisional picture here with the NFC North in our next episode. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, folks, peace.